Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSPs. Today I'm going to give you, I guess you could call it a Ukraine war geopolitics video. There are elements that will pertain to the Ukraine war, but this is generally a video about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and the fallout from that. Stuff I was going to discuss yesterday with Professor Gerdes, but he didn't seem to be in the right place at that time to discuss some of these more strategic ideas, but also actually some of the what appears to be facts coming out about who the shooter was and how that changes pretty much everything, in my opinion. So lots to talk about. This is a divisive topic, right? And I know there are a number of you who are, one, Republicans or lean Republicans or whatever. Two, Trump fans. Three, Republicans who aren't Trump fans but are Republicans, and therefore, even though you might not like Trump, he is your guy, and therefore any criticism on Trump is a de facto criticism of republicanism, and therefore the things I'm going to say might be uncomfortable for you. You might shut down, or you might spit at me for having some liberal bias or whatever, but please just listen to what I'm going to say and take on board the claims, because it's important. It's important that we understand what's happened and what is happening and what will continue to happen and why people are reacting in the way that they are. And I think that goes to show that some of these facts that are filtering out at the moment might not sit well with some of the narratives that have been proclaimed. So let's start with well, we know what happened, right? There was a shooter who was on top of a building at the Trump rally in Butler in Pennsylvania, shot a number of times. One of the bullets went through Trump's ear as he turned his head. And it was all very lucky for Trump, because had he not had some kind of thing on display that he doesn't usually have, had he not turned his head in a way that he doesn't usually turn his head to the side, then that wouldn't have happened and things would have been very different. Anyway, one person has died, others injured as a result of the shooting in the crowd. Trump was whisked away by Secret Services, punched the air, said fight, fight, and was very defiant there. And in fact wanted to go and speak back on a microphone, but was bundled away by the Secret Services into the car and whisked off. And you then had the fallout, right, as the shooter was himself shot on the top. And we'll talk about some of the mechanics of what happened a bit later after we talk about the general fallout. So one of the things is that both parties decided to pull ads. I think particularly the Democrats have pulled attack ads on Trump. Obviously that would have been seen in poor taste had they continued. Although I think Biden is going to continue campaigning on Tuesday. Trump is at the Republican National Committee convention, RNC convention today in Milwaukee. And there are thoughts that he will be treated as a hero, that this will be very good for his kind of PR in a sense, as he can take on being the victim, the hero. It's what many on the right were saying, it's the rhetoric of the left, and it's a sad indictment of leftism in the US, so on and so forth. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Let's just go first to how Russia has been interpreting this to connect this to the Ukraine war. You knew this was coming, says Trent Telenko. So quoting Russian propagandists immediately after the attempt of the US president candidate Donald Trump launched a fake about the alleged involvement of the Ukrainian special services in the attempt. The Center for Combating Disinformation reports absolutely they're going to try and tie this to Ukraine and have been doing so. Russia gloats over shooting. Trump has Biden's balls in his hands. This is Julie Davis quoting her Daily Beast article about propagandists in Russia being giddy with excitement, saying that they had predicted Biden would try to have Trump killed, and claiming their MAGA hero is now certain to win. So the Russians are trying to connect the shooting to Biden. Because they have a favourite in the race. They want Trump to win, the Russians, for all the reasons I've talked about for a long time, that Trump will be harsh on Ukraine, will stop aid to Ukraine, and that's to the benefit of the Russians. So they want Trump to win, and connecting the shooting to Biden directly and to Ukraine, and therefore making Ukraine a very much a partisan issue. Only the Democrats will be the ones supporting Ukraine, and if Ukraine and the Democrats are responsible for the shooting of Trump, then of course that will play well with the certain elements of the American electorate and might sway people in the middle. And so they are going to be amplifying that through their information campaigns on social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and so on and so forth. This is what, says Steve Rosenberg of the BBC, this is what state TV in Russia is telling viewers tonight. Quote, today, Trump quite literally spilled blood for America. He is now highly likely to get back not only the Oval Office, but also control of key state institutions, Congress, the Prosecutor's Office, the Supreme Court. So they are kind of reveling in what has happened. Other people are piling in. I've already talked about people like Jackson Hinkle and Ian Mars-Chong. Ian Mars-Chong, for example, a Malaysian, very right-wing, goodness me, what would you call him, provocateur, social media entity, says, I'm 1,000,000% behind Trump now. We are at war. This we idea, we are at war. This was the first shot. And Republicans against Trump said, this guy who lives in Malaysia and works for the Russian propaganda outlet RT says, what? Other people saying he's never once set foot inside the US. So what's this whole we are at war, etc., etc. And of course, these are just the elements of the pro-Russian, very much alt-right, far-right movements in the US mobilizing to really capitalize on this against the Democrats in the US. War Translated, Dmitry says, turns out that the great conspiracy theorist Dugin, so the philosopher Alexander Dugin, who is the thinker behind much of Putin's policies, thoughts, speeches, essays even. Anyway, Dugin is a fan of Donald Trump. He speaks extremely warmly of the former president, condemning the assassination attempt, but he doesn't just condemn it. He accuses the following, a mixture of, quote, Ukrainian Nazism, liberalism, and cultural Marxism with the LGBT community, with Schwab, Zuckerberg, Harari, Kurzweil, and American deep state, end quote. So this is very clearly the strategy of the Russians, is to throw all their usual talking points, like the sexual degradation of the West, you know, LGBT, that they've already seen as extremist in Russia, and some of these people that represent cultural Marxism. What is that? I mean, really explain that. The American deep state, they're going to town on this, bundling all this together and saying that's what's responsible for the shooting. This extremely consistent citizen condemns the killing of one, but immediately calls for the killing of Biden. The mass murder of civilians in Mariupol and many other towns and cities does not concern him. Complete double standards, of course. And then we've seen a whole raft of Russian ordnance with to Trump and stuff like this. For Trump's ear, this one says. We've seen missiles and bombs and shells daubed with this kind of sentiment. That's a 152 mil shell there. And as Shashank Joshi says, we're already seeing the disgusting appropriation of the assassination attempt for partisan electoral purposes. Dangerous, reckless, odious. Okay, so we're moving now from the capitalization of what's happened in Russia and opportunistically using that for their own agenda to what's happening in the US. And Shashank Joshi is no left-wing ideologue, right? He is a defense correspondent for The Economist, right? So this is not some kind of super left-winger. We know Trump has authoritarian tendencies because he attempted to overturn the result of the legitimate election. Pointing out that he poses a serious threat to American democracy is not the same as endorsing political violence, whatever demagogues like Vance might claim. As many colleagues have written entirely correctly, quote, as my colleagues, sorry, in pursuing his enemies, Mr. Trump will wage war on any institution that stands in his way, including the courts and the Department of Justice. End quote. It does not follow that political violence is right. And so he's reacting to some of the people who have come out, some of these American politicians who have come out and very publicly kind of tied this to Democratic rhetoric incorrectly, right? So J.D. Vance, who is almost certainly going to be Trump's vice president pick. Says today is not just some isolated incident. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. It's the idea that Trump must be stopped at all costs, which would include killing him, is something that the Democrats will want, is absolutely false, right? This is not the central premise of the campaign, of the Biden campaign. That is absolutely egregious to say that. So basically, Vance, who's claiming that the rhetoric of the left is all horrific, is saying that the left, the central premise of the left is that Trump should be stopped at all costs. In other words, we'll be fine with killing him. And that is incredibly disingenuous and outright incorrect. And of course, he then goes on, that rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination is not true, but it is itself a form of the rhetoric that he's decrying. And it's really, really unhelpful. So people are coming out against people like Vance. And what do we have? Let's go and see what Marjorie Taylor Greene has said. So Marjorie Taylor Greene comes out and says, we are in a battle with good and evil. The Democrats are a party of paedophiles murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. They want to lock up their political opponents and terrorize innocent Americans who would tell the truth about it. The Democrat Party is flat out evil, and yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. Right, so again, you've just got unbelievable in-your-face hypocrisy here. So someone that's saying, oh, the Democrat Party tried to kill this, and they want to lock up political opponents, when we have had Trump saying Elizabeth Cheney is guilty of treason, and you should re-truth this if you want televised military tribunals. So calling on Liz Cheney just because she called out his insurrection activities this is the idea that she should be locked up, and yet you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene hypocritically saying that's what Democrats want. It's absolutely unbelievable. Then spouting stuff like it's a party of paedophiles and that they murder innocent unborn, abortion is murder, and don't get me on the philosophy of that and how incorrect that is. Violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. So she's calling Ukraine a meaningless, endless war. Bloody, meaningless, endless war. I mean, it is bloody, but it's not meaningless, and hopefully it's not endless, and it wouldn't be endless if actually you got behind the Ukrainians. But the Democrats are the ones behind violence, when, if you remember correctly, what happened at the Capitol, it was Republican and Trump supporters who raised gallows and were chanting "Hang Mike Pence." So, I mean, I could get really angry here, like really genuinely angry, because actually I think the Democrats are being vilified vastly unfairly. And we're going to get onto why that is, particularly because I think the Republicans were so knee-jerk in their reaction that they didn't wait to see what the motivation behind the shooter was. And I think it's going to come back and bite them on the arse, because the shooter isn't who they thought it was. We're gonna talk about some details in a second, but it just seems incredibly hypocritical that you get stuff like this taking place. Cheney states Trump said January 6th that Pence deserves to be hanged. Okay.
January 6th was a very interesting day because they don't report it properly. People in that crowd said it was the most beautiful day they've ever experienced. There was love in that crowd. There was love and unity.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts.
I call them the J6 hostages. Not prisoners, I call them the hostages.
There'll be a lot of pardons and commutations of J6 defendants, January 6 defendants under your administration?
Yes, absolutely. They were there with love in their heart. That was an unbelievable, and it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day.
So I think
inside.
that is really important to understand. I know that was put together in a very like persuasive, emotive way, but that's the reality of it. There was love, there was unity, and you know, and then you had Hang Mike Pence, and he's condoning that and even twisting that to be something of love and unity. It's just it blows my mind that the people have such short memories that they're attacking the left for having like violent rhetoric. Just it is, and I'm genuinely angry about this. And Mike Pence, not someone I politically agree with ideologically, but my goodness, the silence says everything.
We're barricaded inside the House chamber, and in the middle of it all, you can see that the president has tweeted. 2:24 p.m. The president tweets, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done."
It angered me. But I turned to my daughter, who was standing nearby, and I said, it doesn't take courage to break the law. It takes courage to uphold the law. I mean, the president's words were reckless. It was clear he decided to be part of the problem.
And is there any surprise that Mike Pence has not endorsed him? And so, you know, it's really rich that people are coming out like J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene, some people on my threads, and so a vast number of people, you know, your Trent Telenkos and your John Conrads and some sources I often use in my discussion of the war in Ukraine, just coming out and saying like overtly problematic things. And the whole crux of well, actually, we won't get to the shooter. We'll get to the shooter in a second. So let's just go to Phillips O'Brien here. He says, remember what Trump and many of his supporters said about the Paul Pelosi assassination attempt. Be better than them, but don't pretend that they care about dignity at all. And this is Paul Pelosi. Would have been Nancy Pelosi, but Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, was battered on the head with a hammer. And the mocking of Paul Pelosi was absolutely horrific. I don't know if you've seen, I don't know if I have the video of that happening, but you've got Trump mocking Paul Pelosi, and I don't know if it's here. Yeah, Trump mocking Paul Pelosi himself, and Marjorie Taylor Greene doing so. Like, absolutely unacceptable that a former president would mock someone that's just been beaten with a hammer in an attempted assassination of Nancy Pelosi. So, like, what right do then some of these people have? I mean, they've got a right in and of itself, but my goodness, the hypocrisy that it takes to spout this kind of rhetoric, I think is absolutely disgusting, and shows just a vast lack of contextual knowledge. Now, we're going to return to that idea, but then we're going to go to the shooter at the moment. So Oliver Alexander says, the more I hear about Crooks, the guy that did the shooting, the less I think this assassination attempt was politically motivated. He seems like a sad guy who was relentlessly bullied and then decided to suicide by cop in the most high-profile way possible. If you've always been a social loser, this might have felt like his chance to leave a legacy. Him being relatively local might also point to this being a target of opportunity more so than a planned political assassination. As for the incompetence and security failures that led to this attack happening, we don't know how many times these security lapses have happened previously where there was just no one present to exploit them. Similar lapses could have happened many times previously. That's a really good point, actually. From the interviews and the information being released, he feels a lot more like your textbook school shooter than political assassin. This might actually help to explain why he targeted Trump. If you're constantly relentlessly bullied for sticking with your conservative, possibly MAGA beliefs, you might want to take it out on the person who made you that way. Honestly, sounding more and more like a sad, lonely guy battling serious inner demons who decided to act in the worst possible way rather than anything with a larger political goal. Now, I'm going to say why I broadly agree with this. I mean, first of all, he donated $15 to a progressive political campaign when he was 17. but then subsequent to that became a registered Republican. So I know that you'll have Democrats going, he's a registered Republican, and Republicans going, he gave to Democrats. But actually, there was a chronology here where when he was younger, he was seemingly possibly more leaning to supporting Democrats, and then as he became older, he became a registered Republican. But it's actually what happened while he was at school that gives us an understanding as to maybe who he was. And so this is incredibly, incredibly important, because basically for the Republicans to be able to weaponize this in a campaign kind of manner, to strategize around this being the fault of the Democrats, they need this shooter to be very clearly connected to the Democrats, to be ideologically linked, if not like outright promoted to do this by the Democrats. And if that's not the case, and in fact, if it's kind of opposite to that, then there are some serious troubles for the Republicans. This could be a real problem for the Republicans if they have based their whole narrative and reaction to this assassination on a faulty concept of who was responsible. This could come back and bite them on a posterior. So the Trump rally gunman, says the Daily Beast, was, quote, definitely conservative, classmate recalls. In fact, they are themselves referring to a Philadelphia Inquirer article that I'm going to read to you. So why Thomas Matthew Crooks tried to assassinate Donald Trump is a mystery to investigators and his ex-classmates. The first thing to note here is that actually people are still very unclear as to what drove this shooter, which means it's not openly obvious that this guy was some kind of super Democrat activist, that he wore his heart on his sleeve. In fact, he wore on his sleeve an emblem of a YouTube channel, Demolitia, that shows that he is a gun enthusiast at the very least, which would then, and the fact that, you know, assassinating someone with an AR-15 is not the sort of thing you would expect a Democrat, a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat to do that was felt so strongly about democratic ideals. You know, assassinating a president in this way would be the last thing you'd expect them to do, maybe. So there's nothing openly so obvious about his intentions. He also had explosives, I think, found in his car, so who knows what his eventual intentions were. This article says the thought that their mild-mannered ex-classmate would try to kill former President Donald Trump was difficult to process in this tight-knit community near Pittsburgh. In the sea of caps and gowns, Thomas Matthew Crooks hardly stood out. A few people clapped his name when his name was called. A YouTube video of the graduation 2 years ago from Bethel Park High School shows a slender and bespectacled student receiving his diploma with a soft smile. But the class of 2022 awoke Sunday to learn that the 20-year-old Allegheny County man was notorious, the shooter in the assassination attempt of the former President Donald Trump during a rally that left an ex-firefighter, Corey Comperatore, dead and 2 other attendees wounded. US Secret Service counter-snipers killed Crooks moments after he opened fire on the Saturday night rally from a nearby rooftop. The FBI said Sunday they believed he acted alone. He had not been on the Bureau's radar. Crooks' actions shocked residents in his hometown, sparked countless conspiracy theories online. And just for me to interrupt here, some of these conspiracy theories have been about this being staged, clearly not staged. Some of it being about this cabal of democratic, I don't know, ideologues or whatever being behind the shooting of Trump. So, you know, that's cut both ways and prompted investigators to begin combing through every aspect of his life looking for motive. The mystery has been fueled by a near total absence of Crooks' social media postings, political writings, or other digital fingerprints. Several former classmates appeared on national television Sunday, quickly casting Crooks as a stereotypical loner who was bullied heavily during his time at Bethel Park. One of them, Jason Curler, told reporters Sunday that students tormented Crooks, quote, almost every day, and that he often wore, quote, hunting outfits to class. Quote, he was just an outcast, Curler said, and you know how kids are nowadays. Yet 2 former students interviewed by the Inquirer disputed the characterization. They did not recall specific incidents of violence or other antagonism involving the now infamous classmates in the community they described as generally tight-knit. Mark Sigafus remembered Crooks as a quiet but friendly kid he shared 2 classes with at Bethel Park. Quote, he was very kind, Sigafus said Sunday by phone. He was a nerdy kid, and I don't think he was as harshly bullied as some people are saying. He never wore trench coats or anything of the sort to school. A Tribune Review article from Bethel Park's June 2022 graduation credited Crooks with earning an academic award for math and science, and Sigafus said that when he didn't understand the course material, Crooks was someone he turned to for help. The thought that the mild-mannered student would try to kill former President Trump was difficult to process. I feel like this is one of those things that you wouldn't expect from him, Sigafus said. No one that I know said they ever found him to be a creepy loner kind of guy. FBI investigators found materials for 2 explosive devices in Crooks' car. According to the New York Times, police on Sunday restricted public access to the gunman's home in Bethel Park, nestled in a middle-class suburb 8 miles from the south of Pittsburgh. The slight traces of public information Crooks left behind leave few clues about his political ideology. The federal campaign finance records show he made a $15 donation to a Progressive Political Action Committee in 2021. After President Joe Biden's election, but later registered as a Republican, according to Pennsylvania voter data. His father was a registered Libertarian, his mother a Democrat. Crooks' body was found on the rooftop of an agricultural tool manufacturing plant a few hundred feet from the rally with the AR-style semi-automatic rifle legally purchased by his father. The shooter was wearing a t-shirt promoting the Demolition Ranch, a YouTube channel for gun enthusiasts. If Crooks maintained any personal social media presence, it went largely undetected on Sunday. Discord, an instant messaging platform mainly used by video gamers, released a statement acknowledging Crooks held a rarely utilised account that contained no information relevant to the shooting. Sigafus did not recall Crooks making political overtures in class, but rather as someone interested in how government works and, quote, not trying to insert his own beliefs into it. Another former classmate did not share this view. Max R. Smith recalled taking an American history course with Crooks as a sophomore. He did recall Crooks making political statements, but they shed no light on his actions Sunday. Quote, he definitely was conservative, he said. Quote, it makes me wonder why he would carry out an assassination attempt on the conservative candidate. Smith recalled a mock debate in which their history professor posed government policy questions and asked students to stand on one side of the classroom or the other to signal their support or opposition for a given proposal. Quote, the majority of the class were on the liberal side, but Tom, no matter what, always stood his ground on the conservative side, Smith said. That's still the picture I have of him, just standing alone on one side while the rest of the class was on the other. The former classmate also recalled Crooks as generally kind and intelligent, if reserved. Quote, everybody's in shock, Smith said. He was so quiet, I couldn't imagine him doing that, but I guess that was the same deal with Columbine. Shocked would be an understatement, Sigafus added. None of my friends can fathom that a dude we knew would try to kill Trump. And so on and so forth. So it goes on, but I don't think there's too much else to add to that. It's also worth noting that Thomas Crooks, the would-be assassin, Thomas N. Crooks, is supposed to have donated $15 to Act Blue, a progressive cause, when he was 17, but many people are now pointing out that actually that looks like it was another Thomas Crooks, who is age 69 living in Pittsburgh, who donated that, and it wasn't Thomas M. Crooks, who would have been 17 at the time, and therefore it would have been illegal for him to have done so. As someone here says, dude literally did not donate to any Democrat. What was reported as a donation to Act Blue happened when he was 17 and would have been illegal. Donations from Thomas Crooks, 69 of Pittsburgh, and not the shooter, Thomas M. Crooks. I mean, take these with a pinch of salt, but if that is indeed true, and I'd like to see some confirmation in this context, then that really changes things even more, because it would then make more sense that the chap wasn't indeed a Democrat-leaning person, because he ended up registering as a Republican and didn't donate to Act Blue, and therefore, you know, it comes down again to the idea that he was a disturbed individual, and this wasn't as politically motivated as one might have thought. I mean, the idea is, if we can trust the claims that he was a conservative that stood on the side of conservative values every single time they were brought up in a class debate, then at the very least, this boy, this kid, this young man did not fit the picture that is otherwise being painted by many who are defending Trump and pro Republican pro-Trump, such as J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And as a result of that, there's clearly no overt support of democratic ideals here. Then it undermines that narrative that such people are presenting, that this is somehow Biden's fault for the rhetoric that the left has been throwing out consistently, so on and so forth, that I just find thoroughly problematic. I think this is said the best by Brian Tyler Coe. Now, I know this guy's an avowed liberal. Okay, do you contest the things he says here? Because I think this is a spot-on analysis from BTC.
So I wanted to make that clear right off the bat, because the right has a long history of scapegoating Democrats for things that Democrats have nothing to do with. Why a conservative would try to assassinate the conservative candidate in this race is beyond me, but certainly had nothing to do with Joe Biden or the left. But to J.D. Vance's tweet, this idea that calling Trump a fascist led to his assassination attempt, let's discuss that. First of all, Donald Trump is a fascist. That doesn't mean assassinate him, but he is a fascist. He wants to consolidate power into the executive branch. He wants to use the military as a weapon to suppress dissent. He wants an army of loyalists to do his bidding. He wants to be a dictator. He wants to suspend the Constitution. Those are his words, by the way, things that he said. So yes, he is a fascist. But Vance has unilaterally decided to reverse engineer a way to blame the left, and that is by pointing to the things that the left is absolutely correct and justified in saying, which is acknowledging the objective reality that Trump is a fascist and deciding that because that's now the cause of the shooting, that everyone on the left who said it is suddenly responsible. That's not only insane and dangerous, but it's just a bad faith way to absolve the people who are perpetuating the violence while blaming the people who have long since condemned the violence. It's not the Democrats or Biden who told rallygoers again to beat up protesters and that we'd pay for their legal bills. That was Trump. It's not the Democrats or Biden who laughed at Paul Pelosi being bludgeoned with a hammer. That was Trump. It's not the Democrats or Biden who called for military tribunals for Liz Cheney. That was Trump. It wasn't Democrats or Biden who called for General Mark Milley to be executed. That was Trump. It's not the Democrats or Biden who posted a baseball bat photo with Alvin Bragg and threatened death and destruction if he was charged. That was Trump. It's not the Democrats or Biden who reposted images on the Truth Social showing Biden hogtied in the bed of a truck. That was Trump. It's not the Democrats or Biden who laughed off a kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer. That was Trump. We don't want Trump in power because we don't want violence. So let's not get it twisted. In fact, you want to see the difference on display? Here, for example, is the left's reaction to this shooting. AOC, there's no place for political violence, including the horrific incident we just witnessed in Pennsylvania. It is absolutely unacceptable and must be denounced in the strongest terms. My heart goes out to all the victims, and I wish the former president a speedy recovery. Chris Murphy, there's no room in America for political violence. We should all condemn what happened today, and I'm hoping for the health of the former president and everyone else at the rally. And Joe Biden.
There's no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized.
Meanwhile, here's how the right reacted when it's a Democrat who's the victim. Paul Pelosi's bludgeoned with a hammer, and Don Jr. posts, "Got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume ready." Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene getting her audience to boo Paul Pelosi at a rally.
Where Americans are robbed, stabbed, raped, kidnapped, carjacked, and murdered. But the only crime victim you hear about from Democrats and the media is Paul Pelosi.
And of course, Trump himself poking fun at Paul Pelosi after he was attacked.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know?
And that's disgusting. That is objectively, well, I would argue, I find that disgusting, right? And I wonder whether there's this knowledge that actually these guys have said some pretty deplorable things to the point where it's overtly hypocritical if they go too hard now. And so Trump is kind of scaling it back a little.
And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job.
So no, both parties are not the same. Let's not pretend that one doesn't immediately and unequivocally condemn violence while the other one revels in it. The only difference is that the pearl clutching on the right only begins when the violence happens to them. And therein lies the real difference here. The left doesn't want any political violence, while the right is fine with it so long as it doesn't impact them. There's also the fact that had the Democrats gotten their way, guns like this wouldn't even be available to the general public. It is the...
Okay, and obviously going on to ideas of gun control and whatnot, well, I don't want to sidetrack this. I mean, let's go back to what Marjorie Taylor Greene has said and compare that to what AOC has said. You know, we're in a battle between good and evil, blah, 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 blah. Democrat Party is flat out evil. And yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. Not some screwed up kid with some unknown ideology going on in his head. No, it's the Democrats that tried to murder Trump. So I'm with Brian Tyler Cohen on this. I think we have seen some pretty disgusting reaction from some people. Thankfully, Trump has actually he's reined some of that in. And I think that could be because he recognises he's probably getting some intelligence on who this kid is, who this young man is, to the point where he's like, oh, okay, we can't so clearly attach this to the Democrats as we might have originally thought we could. Professor Grotescheller says, I have told people this countless times over the past several years, that parties have spent huge amounts of time and effort trying to get their voters to turn out by increasing the perceived threat level by the other side. In recent memory, Romney was going to put black people in chains and Obama was a secret commie Muslim. The problem is that when that guy wins and the county doesn't become a People's Republic of Islam America, next cycle you have to up the ante. When you've spent as much time and effort convincing your side that the other guys literally want to kill your side, and you begin to justify all sorts of things to, as your side sees it, defend yourself. And this is not about the would-be assassin, who I suspect will be one of Tom Nichols' Lost Boys, but about the reaction from large parts of the terminally online elements of both parties. And then we go back again to this rhetoric, the Marjorie Taylor Greene rhetoric, that's upping the ante, and upping the ante because that's the only way to go to keep consolidating a part of the electorate that has already been scared into voting your way. As someone once said, can't remember who, if you keep knocking on the devil's door, one day someone is going to answer you. And this doesn't diminish the problems that Trump brings to the next administration. Those are very real. But the problem is that the Dems have spent as much time calling every previous GOP president a hidden fascist that by the time a real one shows up, a huge percentage of the right doesn't want to hear it. That's an interesting point, because actually I think Donald Trump is fascistic, and I've long said that. I've written articles on that. But it's probably been the case that the Democrats have called people like Bush, both Bushes probably, and other Republicans who clearly weren't, and Romney and maybe McCain, like fascistic. And actually that was not entirely correct, right? And so there might be this element of that kind of rhetorical upscaling that has happened over time as well. They have listened to it for decades. Yeah, Chris, you say to me, you're right, but those other times were just politics in action. Yep, all those people on the right knew that then, and they know it now, and they don't effing believe you. Now, to be fair, some are true believers. They want exactly what Trump wants, but most of them are just low info voters who vote GOP. This is a really good point, actually. There's a lot of low info voters, which means low info voters, people don't really pay attention to politics. They don't really have that understanding of the deep intricacies of each kind of policy, but they are kind of tribal, and they would vote without much requisite knowledge on their guy. The left has these too. Don't try to pretend you don't. And to be clear, this is not just something the left has done. The right has done it too, and maybe to a worse degree. In fact, if the situation was reversed and an actual real-life Stalinist was a Dem nominee and was like 99% of Stalins die before hitting the workers' paradise jackpot, I'm going to Stalin harder than everyone has Stalined before, the exact same thing would happen. There would be the true believers on the left going, F yeah, Stalin, and the low info voters going, what? They said Clinton was Stalin, and I like that guy. This is just politics again. if you don't think that all we need to do is turn down the temper and calm down, I would ask you to look around and see if that's happening. So some interesting points there about this ramping up over time. And I think you get that in a two-party system. This is much more likely to happen. You don't get an outlet other than a very narrow binary choice. So you're not really reflected, you're not represented in politics in America, because you might have some ideas that align with this party and just a few more that align with that party, so you jump into that pot and you have to take on everything. And this really large umbrella on both sides has this broad church of people who have been drawn to this party that might have really disparate views. But then you get into that kind of tribe, and then you polarize to those views, and you take them all on because it becomes about us versus them, and there's no other options to represent you. And I think a two-party system leads to a really dangerous divisiveness in the political landscape and in information spaces. Truly problematic. So, like, before we go on now to look at the shooter here, or not the shooting. Sorry, I just want to say that yes, it seems possibly like I've been a shill for the Democrats here, but actually I am reacting to some really strong rhetoric that came out straight away, absolutely lambasting the left for this and blaming Biden directly for this. And Biden's some doddery old man who supposedly can't do X, Y, and Z, and yet he is behind this assassination attempt. And actually, the reality appears to be far from it. I can't look past the idea that this is some kind of strange, possibly tormented soul doing something that isn't particularly ideologically motivated, but I don't know, maybe more information will come out. I'm just very guarded about laying the blame for this on any particular Democrat politician here, especially when you've seen rhetoric that's been far worse before this, as you've been shown today, but also since this event, as you've also been shown today, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc., etc. So yeah, this is it's not a good situation here. Local police officers encountered a shooter before he fired towards Trump. Associated Press sources say one officer climbed onto the roof and encountered Crooks, who pointed his rifle at the officer. The officer retreated down the ladder, and Crooks quickly took a shot toward former President Donald Trump. And that's when the US Secret Service counter snipers shot him. And the officials who spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity. Right, interesting here that there's some video footage of the snipers who might well have had a no-shoot first policy, which seems bizarre that you let a sniper lets a gunman shoot first and then shoot them, or then you're just allowing that gunman to shoot and possibly kill, in this case, the president, and then you kill them. But of course, you know, if you go and shoot anyone you think might be a gunman and it ends up not being a gunman, then, you know, I suppose you can get into trouble either way. So here is a thread. From Tim McMillan, having personally worked several presidential and vice presidential security details, here's some of my thoughts based on the available information of the assassination attempt on Trump. Right. It's the Secret Service's job to protect the president. If having local law enforcement cover the mid-tier is a weak link, it is the Secret Service's responsibility to correct this. The Secret Service cannot be absolved of responsibility by arguing that they delegated responsibility to an untrained, unprepared local law enforcement. Is one of the claims that isn't on the end of that thread. Let's find the actual thread. It seems to have gone missing. He goes on to say the Secret Service, the Secret Service employ a multi-tiered defense in-depth approach to protective missions. An inner tier offer close protection support, these being the agents you see rushing in and surrounding Trump after the initial shots go off. A second middle tier is tasked with identifying and defending against mid-range threats, e.g. the crowd, etc. This tier is largely comprised of local and state law enforcement temporarily attached to the security detail. This is the area that I worked on in prior details. Finally, you have the extend tier, which covers long distance threats. This can include counter sniper details and cyber or SIGINT support and CBRN defense. 2. People have wondered how could the counter snipers in the videos not have seen a would-be assassin prior to getting off a shot. This is because the area of responsibility for those counter snipers on the roof behind Trump was very likely in the extend tier. Essentially, they were scanning for threats at great distance, well beyond the roughly 150 meters the threat appeared. This is evidenced by the fact that the elevated counter sniper has to dramatically drop his line of sight to respond to the shooter. Secret Service advanced teams would have absolutely pre-scouted the location and identified the building the shooter used as a vulnerable spot in the defense, which begs the question, how was this guy still able to climb on the roof and get off a shot? Based on the limited detail at this point, in my opinion, the security breakdown occurred in the middle tier, which would likely include law enforcement who were supposed to be assigned to the area near the buildings. Now, this is me talking now, it seems to be the case with the Gary O'Donoghue interview of that guy with the ginger hair poking out of the visor, who was saying that we were letting the police know in the local area, look, the guy's up there, the guy's up there. And so this does seem to have been the middle tier area. How that significant of a breakdown could occur is up for speculation. However, like I said, this tier is largely dependent on local law enforcement and not the Secret Service. So speculatively, the local LEOs who were supposed to be in the area and make sure no one with a gun climbed up on the roof effed up. 3, people have said that witnesses saw the guy with a gun on the roof, told police, but they failed to respond and prevent the assassination attempt. So how does that happen? Well, there's typically limited lines of communication between the Secret Service and local LEOs working in the middle tier. You usually have 1 or 2 local LEO liaisons who have direct communication with the Secret Service, which means communications on the ground between the local LEOs being told about the shooter are being routed through dispatch to local liaisons, then to the Secret Service. Compounding the difficulty to rapidly respond is the fact that there's always some confusion and inefficiency when multiple different LEO agencies come together to work a detail. Most of these agencies aren't used to working with each other and aren't given much information beyond a few pre-event briefings. I actually saw what can go wrong in these scenarios firsthand when President Bush's Secret Service detail almost engaged a local police or SWAT counter-sniper team during the 2004 G8 summit. No one had properly communicated the local SWAT team's position, so all the Secret Service saw was a heavily armed individuals with a line of sight on a president. The whole thing was seconds away from being a tragic incident. In this same vein, there was likely some delay and confusion with the initial reports of a person with a gun on a roof, as local cops and Secret Service agents would all be trying to confirm the shooter didn't belong to one of the security support teams. So in summary, when looking for blame in this massive security failure, if I was a betting man, I'd say the answer rests with whatever detail likely LEOs, local enforcement officers, were assigned to the area near the outbuildings. I'll also add that I worked 5 presidential details as local LEO attachment. Even though I was in close proximity for each detail, in only 2 of them did I actually ever see the president or vice president. That was Bush while he was in the limo driving away, and Cheney. But that was because I was in a position feet away from him. You're explicitly trained that your eyes are always on the crowd, surroundings, and potential threats, never on the president themselves, for obvious reasons. Now, my experience is entirely limited to official presidential visits, which are planned at least months, and in some cases a year in advance. It's likely that some of the breakdowns or issues I mentioned can be exponentially increased when it comes to campaign trips, as these stops can come up or change on very short notice. Okay, interesting stuff there that I think shows some of the potential vulnerabilities in the Secret Service provision for Trump. And indeed, this video shows you what appears to be that middle tier, where you have people saying, hey, there's a guy on the roof here.
If we were doing the job, I wouldn't even be doing this. I'd be at some beautiful places of gorgeous ocean.
Look, they're all pointing.
The Atlantic, maybe the Pacific.
Yeah, someone's on top of the roof. Look. There he is right there. Right there, see him? He's laying down. See him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
Instead, I'm here with you fighting cartel to get a senator.
What's happening?
And to make sure we take back
Because if we do, we're going to make America better than other people. We're going to make it.
Yeah, look, there he is.
Because we have millions and millions of people in our country that shouldn't be here. Dangerous people, criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
You went right on the roof again.
So, of course, him being on the roof is evident there, and those people were calling the local enforcement officer, and of course they then have to go and find him. Can they see him? Can they get up there? This all takes time, which gives a moment for that shooter to get his shot off. And Trump's response to this, as mentioned, has been fairly demure. He said, "I want to thank the United States Secret Service and all of the law enforcement for their rapid response to the shooting that just took place in Butler, Pennsylvania. Most importantly, I want to extend my condolences to the family of the person at the rally who was killed, and also to the family of another person who was badly injured. It is incredible that such an act can take place in our country. Nothing is known at this time about the shooter, who is now dead. I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of my right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong, in that I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realised then what was happening. God bless America, in caps." That's very much Trump's own language, I think. But then later, this one was, I think, very much written for him, was a sensible approach to take, one of being calm and also calming. Thank you to everyone for your thoughts and prayers yesterday, as it was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening. I don't for a moment think that Trump is religious. We will fear not, but instead remain resilient in our faith and defiant in the face of wickedness. Our love goes out to the other victims and their families. We pray for the recovery of those who were wounded and hold in our hearts the memory of the citizen who was so horribly killed. In this moment, it is more important than ever that we stand united and show our true character as Americans, remaining strong and determined, and not allowing evil to win. I truly love our country and love you all, and look forward to speaking to our great nation this week from Wisconsin. So I think Trump might have some indication that the shooter wasn't an overt Democrat activist, and so he's actually playing the much calmer notes here to his audience, and that's really good. I think this is exactly what Trump needs to do, which is try and unite. Both leaders, Trump and Biden, need to unite the country, because this is not the way forward for anyone concerned. I mean, I don't like any type of violence. I don't like any type of physical affront to politicians. I think even milkshakes to Nigel Farage, thrown at Nigel Farage recently, is not helping. But I'd much rather the next two types of dissent than shooting a gun. This is the way Australians do it. America could take a leaf from how Aussies do political assassinations.
We are going to find them, we're going to help them, we're going to bring them here to Australia. We are going to find...
I love the fact that he laughs and he just understands the Aussie way of things. And that's, you know, Tony Abbott, who, goodness me, I was not a fan of Tony Abbott, but he took that really well. It's like, you're all about your wankers. And then just our other Australasian friends here in New Zealand. Honourable mention to New Zealand's weapon of choice against politicians, the ballistic, should I say, toy of a certain genre, passing very close to that politician's face there. Now, I don't condone either of these things either, but I'd rather see that than a bullet, that is for sure. Anyway, that's enough from me. Too much talk. I know about US politics, very divisive, and many of you won't agree with me, but I will stand resolute in my declaration that I think the right have been, or certain elements of the right have been incredibly hypocritical in what they have said, and they've actually misread the situation too. Not that they care. and it frustrates the heck out of me. It really, really does. Anyway, let me know what you think, and let's do that. Even if we disagree, let's do it respectfully, if at all. That's my plea to you guys. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care and speak soon.